friendship that'll never ever end.
Run!
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie 0725. Shot in that neighborhood, my brothers and sisters. It is our favorite day of the week once again, my friends. Because we get to go back to the man. We get to go back to the myth. We get to go back to the legend, MrBallen. MrBallen Sunday Bean Team. Hope y'all doing excelente out there today. And I'm glad that you came on back to the channel once again to help with the bean. And the title of the video is The Biggest Shock in These Stories Won't Be the Lightning. Sounds like we in for another what the is going on type of video from MrBallen, y'all. And I'm ready to get into it. But before we get into it, Bean Team, y'all know what y'all got to do. Get whatever you might need. Get what you need, please. We're back to the man, the myth, the legend, MrBallen. Y'all got what y'all need, y'all ready to go? Then let's go.
Today, I'm going to tell you two classic spooky stories. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and dump out all their shampoo, and then refill the bottles with glue. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
Ballin'!
At 5:15 p.m. on June 28, 1980, a 38-year-old man named Robert Davidson drove his motorcycle down Interstate 74 in Acton, Indiana, which is a small community just outside of Indianapolis. On the back of the motorcycle, with her arms wrapped around his waist, was Robert's wife. Her name was Wanda. The couple was on their way to visit family, and they were hoping to get there as soon as possible, not because they wanted to visit, but because there was a big storm rolling in, and they were hoping to beat the rain. In fact, right now, right above them, the sky was turning a dark gray and looked very ominous. But as Robert nudged his engine to go a little bit faster, these big raindrops began pelting his arms, and he knew the skies were opening up and he would have to pull over so he and his wife could put on rain jackets. And so Robert pulled over to the side of the road, and as soon as he was stopped, Wanda climbed off, and Robert was about to climb off as well and open up the little trunk in the back of the motorcycle to get the rain jackets. But before he did that, there was this sudden flash of light, and then Robert felt pain all throughout his body. His muscles went totally rigid, and then he crumpled off his bike onto the ground, and everything went black. Less than 5 minutes later, an ambulance arrived on the scene, and several first responders jumped out, including a woman named Kimberly Cobb. Now, Kimberly had been briefed up on this situation. A man and his wife had pulled over on the side of Interstate 74, and the man had been struck by lightning. And so as she—
Like, what is the chances of you getting struck by lightning, Bean Team? That is terrible freaking look. Just long story short, short story long.
ran up to the couple, she could see Robert was on the ground. He was not moving. His skin was waxy and gray, and his wife was sort of in shock, and she was standing next to him, just kind of sobbing uncontrollably. And Kimberly, she jumped into action. She jumped down next to Robert, and she felt for a pulse, but he didn't have one. At this point, Kimberly knew she maybe had a couple of minutes here to basically revive Robert, or he was doomed. And so Kimberly, she worked immediately on stabilizing Robert's spine while one of her team members, one of the other first responders, jumped in and began doing CPR. And then a third first responder hopped on the ambulance radio and called in an emergency medical helicopter to get here and fly Robert to a hospital as soon as possible. They quickly got a response from the helicopter crew saying they were en route. But before the crew or any of the first responders could communicate any further over the radio, suddenly, out of nowhere, their ambulance just completely shut down, like completely shut off. The lights, the sirens, the engine, everything went completely silent. And this was a huge problem because some of the medical equipment that they needed to keep Robert alive until the helicopter got here required the ambulance to be on to use it.
Boy, this man just having terrible luck today. He done got shocked by lightning, and now the freaking ambulance and shut down. They can't even keep him alive till the helicopter get there. It's like, it's just piling up. But for some reason, y'all, I feel like he gonna survive. For some reason.
So with the ambulance off, it was useless. But in addition to just what a problem this was, this also was like really confusing to Kimberly and the other first responders. Because when ambulances are built, they are built with the idea that there can never be a situation where the ambulance just totally turns off. Because again, it's like a worst case scenario. And so they give each ambulance 2 batteries, a primary and a backup, so that if for some reason the primary dies, you always have that backup and can always use the life-saving equipment. So the idea that both of these batteries failed simultaneously was like, how? How could that possibly happen? But before Kimberly or the other first responders could even begin to understand how that happened, something else began happening. They turned and saw there was this woman dressed in this old, long black dress running up the road, this desolate highway. This woman is charging up the road, screaming at them, and above her head, she's waving a Bible, and she's yelling at them to, hey, let me touch him. Let me touch him. I can save him. And the first responders are looking at each other like, what is going on here? Now, none of the first responders, nor Wanda, had any idea who this woman was as she continued running up the road, waving her Bible and yelling at them. But again, you need to picture this scene. The ambulance is off. They can't do anything to help Robert. They're basically waiting for the helicopter to show up, which they hope is on the way, but they can't communicate with the helicopter. And Robert basically is clinically dead at this point. He doesn't have a pulse. He's been struck by lightning. Like, there's nothing anybody can do except wait around and hope the helicopter shows up. And so when this woman came running up to the scene saying she could touch Robert and save him, none of the first responders were like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's bring her in. She can save the day. But they were sort of like, well, no one else is doing anything. And they looked over at Wanda, and she was just as shocked as they were at this woman's arrival and what she was saying. And so the first responders and Wanda just kind of stood there and allowed this woman in her black dress with her Bible to just wander up and crouch down next to Robert and begin this totally bizarre ritual. At first, the woman just began praying over Robert, and she's holding her Bible, and she's very focused and she's calm. And again, Kimberly, the first responders, and Wanda, they're all just standing there looking at each other and looking at this woman being like, what is going on here? But then eventually this woman in black, she begins getting really animated and begins slamming her Bible on the ground over and over again and begins screaming up at the heavens, demanding they save this man's life. Now, Kimberly and the others and Wanda, they're all watching this in total shock and just kind of let it keep on happening. Because again, it was sort of like, at this point, we're already committed, and what harm can this woman do? I mean, Robert's clinically dead. And so Kimberly and the others just stood there silently watching as this woman in black continued to slam her Bible and demand that this man be saved. And then it was like something came over this woman. It was like she was completely possessed, and she grabbed her Bible and she lifted it over her head. She's kneeling right beside Robert. And when she opened her mouth and looked up at the sky, it wasn't her voice that came out. It was like another voice, and she began speaking in tongues, things that didn't make any sense. She's saying all these crazy gibberish things to the sky. And as Kimberly and the others are getting frightened by what they're seeing and are about to step in, it was like the woman just stopped. And she stood up slowly, turned, and walked down the road back the direction she came. And within seconds of this woman beginning to walk off, the ambulance turned back on, lights, sirens, the engine all came back on, nothing wrong with it, and Robert began to breathe.
Oh.
Kimberly and the other first responders and Wanda just stared at Robert in total shock. He had not had a heartbeat for several minutes, like he was dead. How he's alive when there was no medical intervention, really, because the ambulance was off? The only intervention was this woman and whatever she was doing? Like, nobody could comprehend that. But before anybody could make sense of that, the medical helicopter arrived, and seconds later it was chaos getting Robert onto the helicopter, and then before long, Robert, Wanda, and the helicopter took off, and then before long, Kimberly and the other first responders were just left there in the first moment of silence they had had for several minutes, just standing on the side of Interstate 74 thinking, what just happened? Now, none of the first responders wanted to admit to this, but they were all thinking the same thing. That woman in black had to have done something that, brought Robert back to life. I mean, there really was no other explanation. However,
yes, man. And the thing about it, the thing about it with me, y'all, is like, dude, where did she come from? You know what I'm saying? That's the first thing I'm thinking. Like, where did she come from? Did she park her car down the road? Or did God literally just teleported her here or something? I don't know, y'all. I was not expecting Robert to be saved this type of way, to survive in this type of way. You know what I'm saying? Earlier, I said I felt like he was going to survive, but I ain't think it was going to be the woman in black. God is good. That's all I can say.
When the first responders just all kind of looked in the direction where this woman had turned and walked off just a couple of minutes earlier, she was gone. Now keep in mind where she had come from, where she had, run up the road from. It was just one big open road with really no obstructions, and then off to the side of the road was this huge open field. Basically, if someone had been walking for only a couple of minutes in that direction, from their vantage point, they would have seen them. There's nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to go. But she was gone. However, Kimberly and the other first responders would quickly learn that this particular stretch of highway, in fact, more specifically, the field off the side of this highway, had great significance to this whole story. That big field that lined Interstate 74, where effectively the woman in black had disappeared to, used to be the home of a place called the Acton Campground, which was a Methodist community in the 1800s. The members of this community were known for their really loud prayer style and also for speaking in tongues. Now, unfortunately, this community actually burned to the ground in 1864. Afterwards, they rebuilt, but then in 1905, disaster struck again and it burned to the ground again. And this time they did not rebuild. Instead, the community was leveled to the ground, was sold off, and then eventually was just abandoned and became a big empty field. After the story of Robert's miraculous recovery began to spread, some people began to think that the woman in black might have been a ghost of one of these Acton residents from the 1800s who basically was drawn out to save Robert's life. Also, her intense prayers and speaking in tongues, along with the woman disappearing back into the field where the Acton campground had been, certainly seems to cement the idea that this theory could actually be true. However, since that day in 1980, no one has seen the woman in black again. The show is
MrBallen commercial, y'all. But that one there left me in shock, man, because that's the only theory I can come up with, is that she was sent, like I said earlier, and I was joking when I was like, did God just teleport her here? Like, where did she come from? Maybe God did bring her back from the grave, or her spirit or something. And another thing too, y'all, it's a lot of witnesses out there to this story, y'all. It ain't like it was just Robert and his girlfriend and one person, one ambulance paramedic or whatever. It was a whole group of them who all can confirm this story, from the whole him being shocked to him freaking pretty much being dead to the lady coming from down the street, and it's a one-way shot and we don't know where she came from. When she walked away, we don't know where she went. Like, it's a lot of people that is telling that story, y'all, so I actually freaking believe it. Even though it's hard as freak to believe. But I do believe in God, so I guess that'll put my mind at ease. I digress, man. Let's get to the last one, y'all. Let's go.
Or scan the QR code for 10% off your first month of therapy.
A son's nightmares.
One evening in February of 2011, a man in his 30s named Yang was eating dinner inside of his home in a rural village in China. Around him at the table were his 5 elderly aunts, who he lived with and took care of. Now, nobody spoke over dinner. It was totally silent. But this was common, and it was not awkward at all, because Yang actually preferred silence. He had been born with a disability that made it nearly impossible for him to speak. It also had left him blind in one eye, and over the course of Yang's life, he had been sort of bullied for his disability. And as a result, he really didn't like being around other people, and he certainly didn't like trying to talk to other people. I mean, that was really, again, something he had a really hard time doing. But in his life, the few people that totally accepted him and loved him were his family, in particular his 5 aunts. They didn't care at all that basically he never spoke. And so, for example, at this dinner table, there was no expectation that anybody would speak. And Yang loved it. But more than just feeling happy that he could be himself around his aunts, Yang also took a lot of pride in looking after his aunts. You know, he wanted to make sure they were comfortable and well looked after in their old age. So after this silent dinner, Yang stood up and he cleaned the table off, and then he helped one of his aunts go up to her bedroom. And after getting her tucked in, and as Yang was about to go down and help the next aunt go to her bedroom, he heard sirens outside. Now, Yang lives in this very remote rural village in China that's actually so remote they didn't have their own police force. But even more specifically, Yang literally in his whole life had never even heard a siren or seen a police car. And so this is like really unique. And so instead of going and helping his next aunt, Yang went outside to see what was going on. And as soon as he got out there, he looked down the hill. He was up on top of this hill. That's where his house was. He saw at the base of the hill, about 600 feet away, were 2 police cars with their lights flashing. I mean, clearly something major was happening in his town. And so again, feeling very curious because he's never seen anything like this, Yang decides to continue to investigate. And so he leaves his home and begins walking down the road towards the cars. But he stops at a safe distance away because 1, he doesn't want to interfere, and 2, he really doesn't want to talk to the police because he can't really talk. And he's actually worried that he's going to get bullied if he talks to the police. And so from a safe distance, he just stood there and watched whatever was going on. And what was going on is the 2 police officers who had responded and shown up in Yang's village were standing there at the foot of this hill trying to make sense of this insane story a local farmer had just told them. The man was sitting there, his face was in his hands, he was crying hysterically, and he was trying to give them more information, but it was like he was too upset. And finally, one of the officers tells the guy, like, hey, stop what you're doing, start all over again. Calm down and just tell us the story from the beginning. And at this, the farmer did calm down, and after taking a deep breath, he told the officer the story. He said about a week earlier, he had this horrible nightmare. He said he dreamed of his mother and she was shrouded in darkness and she was terrified and she was screaming for his help. And the farmer said, in the dream, he ran to his mother to try to save her. But as soon as he would get close to her, it was like this shadow went over his mother and then she disappeared. And then the farmer would wake up and he'd be so terrified and so upset. Now, at first, the farmer told the officer that, he didn't think much of this nightmare. He was not a superstitious person. He just thought, it's a nightmare. But over the next several days, he kept having the same nightmare about his mother that, she was scared and then she would disappear as soon as he went to help her. And so,
okay, but why are you calling the police about this? You know what I'm saying, y'all? Like you literally calling the police because you having nightmares, or did something happen in real life because of these nightmares? Let's find out.
After a week of these horrible dreams, the farmer said he finally decided, I'm just gonna go check on my mother in person and make sure she's okay. But when he went to his mother's place, his mother was missing and he couldn't find her anywhere. And he had this horrible thought that she'd been abducted. And so he had called the police. Now, the police did understand that it was totally bizarre that they were here ultimately because of some guy's nightmare. But when they went to his mother's place, she really was missing. And so they ultimately told the farmer to just go home and that they would put together a search party and they would look for his mother. And so after the farmer said okay and then headed back towards his place, the 2 officers got back in their cruisers and they drove out of the village past Yang, who was still standing there watching everything happening, back to the police station. And there, the officers immediately coordinated 2 investigative teams that would go out and look for the farmer's mother. Now, one of these—
Time out, y'all. Did Yang do something to this farmer mother or something? Because I'm wondering why Yang is even a part of this story at this point. You know what I'm saying? We started off with Yang, now we gone to this part with the son and the nightmares, and now he found out that his mother missing. But I feel like Yang finna come back in at the very end. Let's find out.
Teams was sent to a local city to basically canvass the area to see if she was there, but that search proved to be fruitless. And then the other investigative team, they were sent back to the village. And when they were there, they went door to door asking all the residents if they had any idea what happened to this farmer's mother. And it was during this search in the village that they got a tip. And that tip would lead them to a very specific location, Yang's home. And when police went to Yang's home, they found the front door was wide open. But when they walked right up and yelled inside of the home, calling out for Yang, nobody yelled back. In fact, the home was totally dark and silent. And so after a few more minutes of police calling out for anyone inside the home to come out and talk to them and not getting an answer, the police decided to walk inside. And so into this dark, cramped home they went. And as they walked, they noticed there were all these dirty towels and dirty dishes and sort of trash everywhere. I mean, the place was kind of a pigsty. And again, it's eerily silent. Every step they took, they were walking on these boards that creaked with every step. And as they're moving, they're calling out, Yang, if you're in here, come out. But again, it's totally silent. And they eventually make their way to the very back of the home. Now, the police really did not know what to expect when they showed up at Yang's place, but they did hope that by going there, they would somehow, some way find a reasonable explanation for all of this. The dream that kicked off this investigation and this totally bizarre tip they got. I mean, they really just wanted to put this thing to bed, and they were hoping that by going to Yang's place, they would get that. However, when the police walked into the very last room they had not searched yet, the very back of his home, they knew there was no reasonable explanation here. That back room is where Yang's aunts all slept. And when the police walked into that room, sure enough, the aunts were in their beds where Yang had left them. However, the police realized, wait a minute, we have been yelling and screaming and trying to get people to come out of the home, yet all these women are still asleep. How could they possibly sleep through all that commotion? But as the police walked up to each of these 5 women, they realized the outlandish tip that had sent them here in the first place had to be correct. It would turn out Yang did not harm that farmer's mother. In fact, he did the opposite. She was one of his 5 elderly aunts, and he went to great lengths to care for each of these women. I mean, he basically would have done anything for them. However, there was a problem. His 5 aunts were dead and had been for a long time. Well,
I knew it, y'all. I felt it coming, y'all. Here come the chills, too. Here come the freaking chills. I knew it when MrBallen said the police went in the room and the aunts was still asleep. I was like, oh, Lord, here it go. Jesus, Yang, what the hell wrong with you, man?
Yang considered these women to be his family, literally. I mean, he called them his aunts. In reality, he was not related to them at all. Instead, these were just women from the local village where he lived who had been nice to him. They had all died of natural causes. But Yang didn't understand it when they passed away. Instead, all Yang knew is that he was sort of an outcast and that nobody respected him and he was treated really badly by most people except for these women. They'd been the only people that really cared about him. And so after they died, he felt really sad and lonely. And so, one by one, he dug these women up and brought them home with him and began caring for them as if they were still alive. When that farmer had gone to go check on his mother after having the recurring nightmare about, her going missing, he had gone to her gravesite and found her coffin was literally empty, hence believing somebody had abducted her body. And then the strange tip police got that led them literally to Yang's house was a local had seen Yang carrying a body up the hill to his home. And his home actually was not a typical home. Instead, Yang's home was actually just a cave that he had outfitted with some boards on the ground for a floor and a couple of makeshift beds. Yang was arrested for what he did, but ultimately he was sent to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. All of the bodies that Yang stole were reburied, and the farmer's recurring nightmares about his mother stopped as soon as her body was returned to her grave. Thank you so
You know what, Bean Team? Now that I'm thinking about it, I ain't gonna be too hard on Yang. I'm not. He clearly had some type of mental health issues going on in his head. So I don't even know if he should go to jail for that. It's crazy as it may sound, or maybe he should do a little time. But y'all know how I be. I be like, man, put him in prison, throw away the key, throw him under the jail. You know, I be quick to make a motherfucker serve life in prison. But I don't feel like he should get life in prison. I think that he should get some mental help, because that ish is crazy, y'all. MrBallen said they was at the damn dinner table eating. He eating with 5 other dead people. Like, listen to how crazy that ish is, man. He sit up there eating with 5 dead women. And then, like, how was he making them sit up? Like, what was the smell like? Like, oh my God, man. Yang, boy, Lord. And then also the fact that he just walked up the hill with the lady dead body. Like, can you imagine him walking up the hill with the lady body and just singing, "It's a good, beautiful day in the neighborhood"? Like, come on, man. That was crazy, y'all. Especially when MrBallen revealed that the women were dead. And then he wasn't even living in a home for real. He was living in a cave, and he just put some wood on the floor, and like, oh my God, that one was crazy too, y'all. The first one is just as crazy, and it's the one where I can't come up with no other theory than what those people said. I believe those people, man. I believe that it was a woman in black that came out of nowhere with the Bible and ended up saving Robert's life. Just long story short story long, being team. But I digress. I'm gonna let y'all go, y'all. I appreciate y'all coming on back on another MrBallen Sunday. And before you leave, just please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and do all that if you ain't did that yet. And remember this: love, peace, and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.